Sawubona wenjabulo zusale kahle nhlupheko ezikhwameni zami ngiyakuthulula ngamngele.
So tonight we've got two panels, as we usually do. The first one including two very pioneering female writers, and after the interval we'll have a very controversial, very heated panel involving two very famous South African writers. The first panel today will be Zepi Dala, South African writer from Durban, and Kirsten Miller, also from the province. The panel will be hosted by Alan Muller, and then afterwards, after the interval, we will have Writing Without Permission, which will include Jacob Lamini and Mzilikazi Wa Africa, and it'll be facilitated by Jackie Shandu. I think there's no use in holding off any longer. Should we maybe get started? I'd like to bring to the stage Zepi Dala, Kirsten Miller, and Alan Muller.
Right, as Mitchell already said, thank you all for braving the rain. No, Durbanites don't like to go out when there's water outside. So just a quick introduction to the authors, followed by a short reading from both of them, just so everyone can get a feel for exactly what they have on offer. Zepi Dala is a freelance writer, novelist, short story writer, and is currently working at an academic institution as a consultant and researcher. She has published short stories in various newspapers and magazines, including the Natal Witness, Marie Claire, Elle Magazine, and Woman and Home. She was awarded second prize in the 2012 True Stories of KwaZulu-Natal and the Woman and Home short story competitions, and was a finalist in the Elle Magazine short story collection. She has also worked in collaboration with Ashwin Desai and Gulam Vahed on a chapter contribution to the book Chatsworth, The Making of a South African Township. Her novel, What About Mira, tells the tale of the eponymous Mira, a young woman of South African Indian descent, born and brought up on a sugarcane farm in a small town in northern KwaZulu-Natal. Mira escapes a life of abuse on the farm and flees to Ireland, where she hopes to find peace. But a subsequent doomed affair and the death of a child facilitate Mira's descent into chaos and mental illness. What About Mira is her debut novel and will be launched this Saturday as part of Time of the Writers Book Day. Kirsten Miller is an artist and writer. She is a 3-time finalist in the SA Pen Literary Award, and her nonfiction book, Children on the Bridge, about her early experiences working in the field of autism, was longlisted for the Alan Payton Sunday Times Award for Nonfiction. Her debut novel, All is Fish, was shortlisted for the Jacana EU Literary Award. Sister Moon tells the story of Catherine, a filmmaker by profession who has the perfect family, a supportive husband and a bright 10-year-old daughter. But Catherine's beloved father is deteriorating. As he slips away into dementia, so too does a guilty truth they share. They both know what happened to Devon, Catherine's sister, a shadow in a beautiful skin. Catherine's adult success has come at a price. Now she has to come to terms with the silences in her past. Miller has a master's degree in creative writing from UKZN. Her dissertation, entitled Hum of the Sun, focuses on the depiction of autism in literature. She currently lives in Durban and manages an early intervention center for autistic children called Action in Autism. Zainab, would you like to start with a quick reading?
Thanks, Alan. Happy St. Patrick's Day, everybody. The particular excerpt I've chosen to read I think is very special to me, and I've chosen it because it talks about a woman's voice and about the little secrets that a woman has to keep. The chapter is titled Firefly. He sat on a wooden chair in the garden underneath the 100-year-old thorn tree. His daughter sat quietly breathing near him. The crickets began to sing love songs. The swallows that flew north for the winter now reveled in the December dusk and came home like obedient children to roost in their muddy homes. Not so far away, in the shacks, fires burnt and their wood smoke brought a fragrance to the night. The dew had not even begun to fall yet. He looked with a side glance at the wild-haired child he had fathered. She seemed lost in the world around her. As always, she sat with one foot dangling off the stool and one tucked underneath her. This tiny, limber, tiny-boned girl, the daughter he knew nothing about, knew not how to talk to. He only knew that his heart would always betray him in her presence. This little place shape she took in the big, wide world. "The swallows came back today, Papa," she commented, breaking the silence. He breathed out loud and wondered why this child was lingering around him tonight. "Yes, they have come home," he replied, and continued into his favorite time of the day, when day gives herself to night. "The old lady who lives in the shacks was selling roasted mealies today, Papa," she said, speaking to him again. He grunted, not knowing what else to say to his daughter. Again, he wondered why this child was seeking out his presence with her mundanities. The air around her asked her father a million questions, but he insisted on small talk, any talk. "I wonder why we don't see fireflies anymore, Papa," she said again whimsically, and he recalled a day when she was 5 years old, as gangly as she was now, and he had taught her how to catch fireflies and put them into empty pickle jars so that they would glow. He remembered with vividness how seriously she'd set about chasing these fireflies, how her high cheekbones would rise to the heavens in her smile when she trapped one, and how she would watch the trapped insect for only a moment before opening the lid and giving it permission to go home to Mommy and Daddy. Thank you.
My turn. The sea was black as we walked on the colorless sand, and I thought that we might as well be on the moon. His palm was rough and warm against mine, and I smiled as the knit of his sleeve brushed my wrist. "Listen, monkey," he said, "you really should be in bed." He took me away from our house, away from my bed and the small village to the other end of the beach just stitched onto the ocean. He looked beyond the bay and the village at something that might have been anchored in the deepest sea, a secret or a dream he'd held before my sister and I existed. "How's your mother?" he asked. "Okay." My father squeezed my hand and I quickened my step to keep up with him. "You didn't pay the electricity," I said. "Things are a bit tight, monkey. Business isn't doing too well. I'll get the money soon." "What is your business?" He lifted his head and stuck his chin towards the sea as though he could find an answer there. "Business is the way that life flows, like the tides in the sea," he said. "Sometimes you win and sometimes you don't." He spread his giant fingers through his hair. "Sometimes your ship comes in and sometimes, well, you show up at the airport instead." "Do you work on the ships?" He guffawed loudly, lifted me high and swung me skywards. We reached the wall that marked the end of the beach where the road arced above it. Samuel leaned against the dappled concrete, his arms folded across his chest. "Want to be a dolphin?" His mouth lifted in a grin. He kicked off his shoes, and I knew what that meant. That smile, that movement. I tried to back away. I ducked down beneath his arm when he came for me, but he was strong and powerful, and I was small as a flea in his hands. He plucked me from the sand and carried me to the waves, waded in until the water covered his jeans to his knees, and he held me above the dark water by my feet and threatened to drop me as I felt my cheeks pulling downwards, wanting to escape my skin through gravity. But Samuel was there, and he would never let me fall.
Thank you both. With the brief introductions, I did cover your professions. Now, I understand it's very rare that novelists in South Africa are novelists alone, but rather wear many hats. How have your respective professions influenced your creative writing? Zainab as a psychologist and Kirsten as an artist and care worker for children with autism. Zainab?
Yes, Alan, you're right. It's very difficult for a writer in South Africa to be a full-time writer and make your daily bread. So we have our careers, but I feel that these careers have largely influenced us. I'm speaking for myself. I am a psychologist. A lot of what I write is my unpacking of the conversations and the sessions that I have with very difficult situations with patients, with people, and with families. So I find sometimes that I'm very selfish because I tend to collect their stories and I write them down to unpack them for my own self so that I can actually find some sense and make some meaning out of what's happening to people. So my career as a psychologist, in a way, has given me the ability to look deeper into situations, to ask the right questions, and also to collect these stories. But most importantly is to tell these stories.
Sure, thank you. Kirsten?
Yeah, the word influence is quite interesting because I think you become a person and what you do. So writing and work, they kind of weave together and become connected and they become who you are. And for me, writing came first because I wrote when I was young, before I even thought about a career. And so whether my work has influenced my writing, I'm not so sure. It may just have been an opportunity to look more deeply into what I am interested in, which is voice. So as a writer, I think I've always been a careful watcher and listener. And so I've become more and more aware of voice. And when you look at autism spectrum disorder, it's very much about people who have physically often don't develop a voice, and then also in society for until very well, it's starting to change now, but we're very marginalized and we're given no voice and always spoken for. So both work together for me. Both inform my work my writing informs my work in autism, and my work in autism informs my work in writing in terms of voice and what is suppressed and what is not.
Having covered how work and writing seem to be quite difficult to keep apart, how do you actually keep them apart? How do you find time to write, and how do you prioritize that time?
I think when I have an idea or I start working on a book, I'm thinking about the book rather than the time. So whenever I get an opportunity, I open my laptop and I work. And I'm one of those fortunate people, I can really work anywhere. I just have to have a screen or a pen or paper in front of me. So I don't really struggle with that. I do often write after work. I'll have a cup of coffee and then I'll go off and do some writing. Weekends.
Sure.
For me, it's a little bit challenging. I've got two very small children. My daughter is 6 and my son is 3. So with work and having these children holding on to my legs all the time, I find it very difficult to make the time to write. I tend to love writing at the very early hours of the morning. So once I've sorted out the bread and milk, I write from about 2:30 to about 6 in the morning, and after that I put on my other hat of mommy and wife, and I find that it's getting easier to switch those hats. But again, like Kirsten, I also snatch wherever time and wherever I can, in the middle of a work day or sitting and waiting for a meeting, I can write little snippets that somehow eventually find its way into the story and onto my screen. Yeah.
Zainab, this is your debut novel. How did the writing of it differ from working with, let's say, your short stories?
Short stories, yes. I started out with short stories. I think with short stories, it's very pacey and it happens very quickly. You've got to get into the narrative very, very fast. You've got to develop your characters almost immediately. And by doing that, you also cannot compromise these characters just because you pushed for space and word count. So every little word that you use matters. In a novel, you are given the latitude to develop characters, to actually work very strongly on their backstories and on their future. So the difference I find is in the pace of the actual narrative between a short story and a novel.
Now, Kirsten, this is now your second novel. How did the writing process differ, or perhaps how was it the same when compared to your debut, All Is Fish?
The novels are very, very different. I can't really say, I don't know about you, Zainab, but I can't say that when I'm working on a novel, I can't say the process is any different for any different book. It also depends on how much time I have available to me. But the process is pretty much similar. I don't know about you.
I think I agree that it is similar, but I think the struggle is the voice. When you're working, well, I've done short stories. This is only one novel, but you find that you've got to change voices, and the voice that you had in your first piece is never the same voice that you're going to have in your 10th piece.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
true. I mean,
yeah.
and also the title of this is Famale Narratives, but as I pointed out to Alan previously, I don't consider myself a female narratives writer. My first novel was in a male voice and in the first person. So although, you know, certain books deal with certain subjects, it doesn't necessarily classify you. And yeah, for me, writing is about inhabiting a character. Whichever character that is, and as the characters differ, so you inhabit that character, yeah, and who they are.
Yeah, I think I'd like to add to that is that it's so tempting to, you know, Kirsten, you wrote as a male with a male voice, and you're a female writer writing with a male voice, incredibly difficult. I find that it's very easy to pen people in and say, for example, in my case, Indian writer or South African Indian writer, and I always say to people, I'm a writer. I could be a Russian writer, or I could be a Nicaraguan writer. It doesn't really matter at the end of the day. I'm a writer, and I should not be given a label. Like Kirsten wrote with a male voice, she was not labeled as a woman writing with a male voice. The voice of the character came through very strongly.
Yeah, and also I've been thinking about this a lot as well. And you know, we have quite stereotyped categories, and I think that while these categories exist, it informs us as a society that we are not yet equal. Because why do these categories have to exist? Because people still need their voices heard in a particular way. And so, for me, it's kind of, okay, this is where we are now. We are still boxing writers and stereotyping writers for a reason. I'm not saying that there is no reason. There's a very, very valuable reason. But it's because those voices have been marginalized, because those voices have not been allowed to speak before, that a platform has actually had to be created for those voices. So my ideal is a society where those platforms are just automatically available to everybody without having to create special labels for them.
Moving on now specifically to the novels that you have with you, you've both set your novels in identifiable South African locations. Zainab's novel evokes the rural Tongaat and its sugarcane and dust, while Kirsten's novel is set around parts of Cape Town and focuses largely on nature and the surrounding landscape. How important is the portrayal of these spaces and places in your respective novels?
For me, setting became an actual character in the novel. Setting was very, very important. I chose a setting that I know very well. I grew up in this setting. So I felt that I had the permission to describe it in its full, rich detail. So it is set in a very rural farming, sugarcane farm in the north of Durban. And because I realized that it's an area or a place or a life that not many people are going to hear about. Not many people are going to hear these little tiny stories. For me, I realized that I've got to make that setting an actual character in the novel, where the setting speaks so much for itself, and it adds richness to the character, the protagonist Mira, and her experience. The place that she finds herself, the dusty sugarcane fields, actually mirror her nebulous mind. So for me, setting was very, very important.
Yeah, it's interesting because I didn't actually ever name the city or the place in my novel specifically, but everybody unanimously knows or presumes that it is Cape Town by the descriptions, because probably the descriptions of nature that I describe with mountains and seas and bays would probably fit in with Cape Town. So I deliberately didn't, but everybody has kind of keyed in that it is probably Cape Town. But for me, setting is very important. I like landscapes, internal and external landscapes. I like to allow landscapes to reflect and mirror an internal landscape. Or I just, it's something that I've developed, or something that I've been very interested in my writing, is to look at how nature mirrors our own emotions and our own feelings on the inside. So, and yeah, I do tend to write a lot around water, and my first novel was also written around water, and I used water a lot, and this novel is also quite an aquatic novel. So, it's important to me.
So why water specifically?
I think I have been described, and I will acknowledge that I am quite an emotional writer. So whereas other writers, I think, will think cognitively about an idea, or cerebrally, my ideas generate on an emotional level. I have an idea for a novel, and I can feel that novel before I even, on a conscious level, know what it is about. And I think water is quite an emotive thing. Water is linked to emotion. I guess, I mean, you could look at lots of things, the whole association with birth, and all sorts of femininity, perhaps. Yes, the idea of submersion. All of those ideas, for me, perhaps that's why I use water a lot.
Right. In addition to that kind of poignancy of place, both novels have a strong focus on the themes of secrets and concealment. From Kirsten's novel, the protagonist says of her parents' marriage that people pose for photographs with smiles that hide secrets in the spaces between the camera clicks. How do both of your novels serve as ways to expose those secrets and the spaces between the clicks?
It's in the blurb and the description, my novel is about abuse, but I prefer to say that my novel is about secrets and what people hide to protect themselves within families. And I mean, we know that it happens everywhere, and people don't talk about it. Last night, Futi described girls sleeping with one eye open, and this happens everywhere. And this is what I want to write about and explore. But it not always, but it often happens in very vulnerable circumstances, in families that have a lot to protect or hold together. And so often these things are known about in families, and yet they're not spoken about for fear of everything unraveling, and the family structure itself unraveling, and then where would anybody be left? And so that's what the novel is about. It's about how fathers and sisters can deny things so strongly just to stay afloat, just to survive. And so essentially, certain family members may be sacrificed, in a sense.
I think, Alan, to answer your question in relation to my novel, secrets form a very cultural backdrop, because as I say in my novel, the photographs that we see are not the ones that we look at. It's the people that are cut out of the photographs with sharp scissors. And in the cultural landscape of my novel particularly, secrets are based on marginalization and stigmatization of women, where they are forced to actually keep these secrets in order to remain accepted within that community. And if they actually reveal these secrets, then they are completely ostracized. So as a woman, you face the dilemma of being cast out completely versus keeping quiet. So what do? You keep quiet. My character kept quiet for many years, and one day she just did not keep quiet any longer. All these secrets came tumbling out, but the huge aftershock of all these terrible things come tumbling out had far-reaching effects on everybody around her. And it's not only her that becomes the victim of these cut-out photographs. It's everybody around her.
Linked to these themes of secrecy and concealment is that of betrayal. Both Mira and Catherine's sister Devon are betrayed by those closest to them, people that they had placed their trust in. How does betrayal function in your respective novels? To what extent did you unpack this idea?
Okay, I think, with women, I find, and in women's writing, in the many women that I've read, sometimes when you are you are placed in a situation where you are a victim, or you are actually looked at as second, you grasp around for ways in which to find empowerment or to find your power. And sometimes those ways that you use are not always ethical, and they're not always positive. Sometimes you engage in betrayal because you want to survive. So you can betray, or you can be the subject of betrayal simply because it's all you have. As a woman, your voice is not always heard, so you can resort to submersive means so that you can actually to find some value in your life. So the theme of betrayal in Mira's life is Mira betrays and Mira is betrayed, but she does it all in the name of trying to gain power, which she never ever had. The betrayal is a terrible thing, and I don't say betrayal is something anybody should experience, but there's a reason behind that betrayal, and that reason is to gain power.
Yeah, I would totally agree. Betrayal is about power, and in my novel it is as well. It is, Devon is betrayed by her own family, members of her own family. She's betrayed by her uncle, who holds the economic power, and she's betrayed by her father, who is threatened by economic power, and she's betrayed by her sister, who aspires to that kind of accepted, existent economic power, and who achieves that in her life. So for me also, central to my book is the economics of these sorts of things as well, because often they are very related to economics within families and within cultures and within society.
While both of your novels are very readable, they tell far more than just a story. To what extent are your novels an exercise in raising awareness about, firstly, gender-based oppression or child abuse? I kind of see your novels, in a way, giving a voice to the characters who've had their own voices silenced.
Yeah, I'm just thinking of one of my favorite writers, and that's Anais Nin, who was a writer way before her time, and she was persecuted and very subjugated for bringing up the issues of the child abuse that she experienced at the hands of her father and her uncle. She never backed down. She always wrote about it, no matter how much of stigmatization or persecution she experienced. Taking from that, the character that I've developed, Mira, comes, as I keep saying, from a cultural context where such things are never even considered as even entering the landscape of people. And if they do, they are quickly silenced. So when I decided that I wanted to write about child abuse, marital abuse, and the stigmatization of divorce in the Indian community, I decided that I'm going to go at it full tilt. I'm not going to sugarcoat it, and I'm going to tell it very harrowing as it is, as horrible as it might sound, the atrocities that a woman who is divorced or a woman that undergoes child abuse has to face, where she is the victim, but most of the time she's looked at as being the perpetrator of that abuse. It reminds me of situations where if a woman is raped, she's considered the agent of that rape, and where she's looked at as inviting that rape. So in a situation with my character where she is a victim of abuse as a child and as an adult, she's blamed for it. She's blamed for her own abuse. And to me, I really wanted to highlight that happens. Yeah.
Sure. Kirsten?
Yeah, I mean, all sorts of kind of spin-off thoughts are happening in my head as from what you're saying. Yeah, very, very much. I mean, it is about abuse. I mean, we faced with stories of abuse from the media on a daily basis from all sectors of society, but we're not engaging properly with the conversation in any way, and we're sticking to other narratives which are quite dominant, but we're not looking at things that are affecting, we're reporting on them, but we're not really looking at these things that are affecting children and women. And most young girls in this country still, they don't know that their body belongs to them. And we are not having that conversation with our little girls. You know, every little girl should be spoken to and taught from a very young age that their body is their own. You know, it doesn't belong to anybody else. Yeah, so that's really what I want to talk about.
You know, I agree with you, Kirsten. I think a lot of self-esteem issues come into play where, as little girls, even as tiny little girls, we grow up, you know, being told fairy stories of pretty little girls who are the victims of dwarves and things like that. So I think, you know, self-esteem and what we are told from the time we're very little forms the entire sort of myriad of experiences that we take into our adulthood. Sometimes we're never given the opportunity to have original thought. We are a product of what we are told and what we are taught, and sometimes we are not always taught the right things.
Yeah, and something that I do speak a lot about in my book is, you were talking about betrayal, Ellen, but the betrayal of beauty as well, and notions of beauty, because I think those play a lot into society and the idea of being female and all of those kinds of things. And just one line: beauty is a deceptive mask for those who bear the weight of it. You know, and it really can be a very difficult thing to deal with for very beautiful girls.
Given that both novels deal with such heavy topics, I've had quite a roller coaster ride the last couple of days. They often leave the reader, i.e. me, quite shocked. Were there scenes or events that you as a writer found particularly difficult to actually put down into words.
Yeah, and they're not in the book. There were places that I just couldn't go, and that's why that door remains closed. Yeah, I just couldn't go there.
Well, for me, Alan, you've read the book, so you know that it's got lots of those scenes. I found that writing particular scenes, and I'm not going to give away the ghost. I'm not going to tell you what it was. You must read the book. I found that there were certain scenes that at the end of writing them, I just sunk down onto the floor shaking, and I wondered, where did that come from? Did I actually write that disgusting, difficult, horrible stuff? And then I realized, yes, I wrote it, and it came from me. So I can sit on the floor and shake and be disgusted by myself, or I can actually embrace the fact that I saw these horrible things in people, but I was able to dissect it, I was able to put it down on paper, and I was able to find, as I said last night, and I was able to find the light in these terrible stories. Yeah, thanks.
Well then, keeping with that light, to both of you, what did you find most rewarding and satisfying about actually either writing these novels or getting them out there?
For me, to answer that question, being a debut novelist, one of the most fantastic things was to be accepted by a publishing house. There's no two ways about saying it. It was wonderful when you get an email pop into your email inbox from Random House saying, we loved your novel and we would love to offer you a publishing deal. So it was one of those run around the house screaming, jumping, and you know, that was a rewarding thing. Of course, the process of actually getting it out there, the editing and all of that was a learning experience. So one of the most rewarding things for me is that I entered into a world that I never ever thought I'd enter into, the literary world, where I've met and interacted with the most fantastic people. I can sit here and say to you it's rewarding that my message is going out, and it's rewarding that people are hearing my voice, which is rewarding. But I think the most rewarding thing is actually now being part of the literary community. Thanks.
Yeah, for me, I have to say it's always the writing process. I love language, and I love writing. I love putting words together and listening to how they sound, and that for me is always the best part. I like to write. Thereafter, I'm very grateful if anything positive happens. But yeah, the writing is for me where the heart of it is. Yeah.
Right, Zainab, now that you've just recently made it to the other side of that door, and Kirsten, you've obviously been on the other side for quite a while. What can we expect from you in the future? What are you currently working on, thinking about? Is there anything in the pipeline?
I'm going to take a very long holiday. No, I'm kidding. I am working on a novel at the moment. It's very sketchy. It's based on expats, people who leave this country and go to the fantastic shores of supposedly safer and better countries, and then come back. So that's a novel I'm working on. I'm also working on a play that is based in the jazz lounge of the famous Casbah of Durban. So that's what I'm working on.
I'm sitting waiting for the publisher's opinion on one novel that I've submitted. I wrote another one last year, which I'm just busy trying to neaten up. I also wrote another one quite a few years ago, which hasn't yet found a publisher. And that one does deal with the political change in South Africa. Yeah, and yeah. So we'll have to wait and see what happens. Good luck. Thank you.
Well, let's hope those novels see the light of day sometime quite soon. I think that is all we have for now. Should we move on to the Q&A?
Please,
All right.
yeah.
Sorry, my eyes are not so good.
House lights.
Yeah.
That's nice.
Have you found that writing and exploring these stories has helped you in counseling the people that have given you these stories? Have you been able to look more in depth and understand where they're coming from and then give them, I don't know, better advice, I suppose?
When we're training as psychologists, we're always encouraged to after sessions, literally after every session, to sit and unpack our experiences because it's actually a very draining process. So, in so much it is as it has helped my clinical process of counseling, it's just helped my own psychological sanity to, after a very difficult session, to be able to sit down and take it all out and put it down on a piece of paper which I can put at the bottom of a drawer and not look at for a while. So in a way, yes, it has enhanced my clinical practice in the sense that I am able to look at it look at different things from a distance, because I move from patient to patient, and you don't take the baggage from one to the other. If that answers your question. Yeah, thanks.
Oh, a few hands. Maybe we can move on to Betty down the bottom.
Okay, we can hear you.
Yeah, we can hear you up here.
All writers draw from experience, but especially in your context, what are the ethical implications of using those narratives? And the other has to deal again with your work, your professional work. To what extent do you have to be really immersed in your professional work to then develop fictionalized accounts of it? And what is the kind of tension and balance between the two? And I'm thinking of Elisa Genoa, who wrote Still Alice, where it comes out of personal experience. You know, the book that's been made into film. It comes out of personal experience and research and her own professional work. But she had to then balance it with the rigorous fictional work.
Is that
that
directed
directed
particularly
at
at
Kirsten
Zainab
or-
or both?
And both of you, yes, because you both work from your profession to your writing, yes.
Yeah, my fiction is pure fiction. I don't take case stories and then turn them into fiction. It is very interesting, though, when you put fiction first, how much real life comes out of the woodwork after that, because it's quite amazing how many conversations that I've had with women that I know quite well, and once they'd read my book, they said, oh, this was really difficult for me because my mother, my sister, my cousin, my friend, my aunt, my this, it had happened to. And literally, I think we have no idea how many people are out there who recognize somebody or themselves in a story like that, and it's just never been vocalized, you know. So for me, with this book, it worked that way, that I wrote it, and it is pure fiction. These characters do not exist, and I haven't met them or any parts of them, and yet, once people read the book, there were similar characters everywhere.
Okay, I'll answer you. I read somewhere Khaled Hosseini, who wrote The Kite Runner and A Thousand Splendid Suns, he's a doctor. And when he starts The Kite Runner, he sets himself up as a prologue, so to speak, about himself and his profession and who he is. So we know where he is coming from well before he enters into the narrative. And I think that's a very brave thing to do, because what he's saying to us is that I'm not plucking this out of the air. I'm somebody who knows what I'm talking about. For me, that was authentic, and I enjoyed knowing where this author is coming from. On an ethical point of view, It's not so much as having stolen these stories from people that I counsel or people that, families that I meet. It's just snippets of conversations I could have at a dinner party that it might appear to you that the conversation means nothing, but to me, it somehow starts rounding itself off into an entire conversation, into an entire chapter or an entire novel. I don't feel that I'm ethically compromising anybody that I meet, because as I keep saying, we are the people that we are surrounded by, and we don't write in a bubble, so we write from somewhere, and that somewhere is what we're surrounded by. Yep. I hope that answers your question.
Good evening. Thank you for those books. My question is about the fact that you all have both written what seems to be social books that go into the experience of being female and the kind of obviously traumatic experiences that you all have heard about or seen or wanted to articulate. But all writing occurs in a certain kind of context, and I'm talking especially to Mrs. Dala now. You know, growing up in Tongaat, I grew up in Amshlali, or Compensation opposite Belito, and there's a certain kind of context, certain kind of relationship between peoples that happen there. So you'd be focusing in your book about the social context of families and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But I find again and again when I read South African writers, they leave out what South Africa is known all over the world for, okay? And I don't think I have to say what South Africa is known all over the world for, okay? So what happens is, I've spoken to some of these writers, and they've said, well, the editor wouldn't allow that context in. And Judge Nicholson, for me, summed it all up when he said, you know, when they asked him why this particular book was published in England and not here, and it was, well, you know, not a mainstream publisher. And he said, when I did my book about Papua Sugala, they wanted me to leave out Gary Player completely. And that's like having Romeo without Juliet. So, you know, what I'm really getting at is how much self-censorship did you indulge in? And I'm addressing this to both of you. And how much censorship did you experience from editors? Because I've certainly experienced it myself, okay, as a writer, as you know.
To answer your question, Dina, not all my novel is set in the sugarcane farm of Tongaat. A large part of my novel is a global novel. It's set in Dublin. But what I found was that the themes were quite universal. Something that happens in a tiny little farm in Tongaat is something that can easily happen in a Victorian brownstone in Black Rock in Dublin. So I found that when it came to censorship with my editors, if that's what you're asking, I found it a difficult process. And the reason was I was placed in a very advocating position where I had to defend myself at every single turn. Why am I saying this? Why am I saying this? Do you think that is too controversial? And do you think that maybe we should leave it out? And my answer at every single turn was, no, we should not leave it out. If you want this novel, take it for exactly what it is. And I stood by that. I never moved from that stance.
Yeah, what you've just said is a conversation I've had a few times recently, is about, you say what South Africa is known for, you know, and whether you leave that out or not. The conversation that I'm having in my head right now is if we always having the conversation that South Africa is known for, what conversations are we having about the implications of that? Okay, and so I in my writing and in my thinking, I'm really, at the moment, trying to think about the implications. So I really am interested in economics of power and economic fallout and how people are affected economically. I'm very interested in gender. Okay, if we're having one conversation, how how are other people on a gender basis being affected? Are their conversations coming out? Education, okay? How is the education both in the home and outside of the home? What conversations are happening there? Okay, so I'm very interested in the conversation that South Africa is known for, but I'm more, because I live here and I see every single day, I see people living here, I'm more interested in the conversation around the effects that has had and what we are grappling with right now, every single day, in terms of gender, economics, schooling, access to schooling for certain marginalized groups, that kind of thing I think is important for me to look at. In terms of censorship, I haven't really experienced it. Yeah. But you know what, I also find publishers and editors, I have found that if I can justify something and I want it to remain, there's always a compromise, if you have a solid reason for something being there.
I think I just want to add, it might seem I was extremely a nightmare to edit, but whatever I stood by, I've got a chapter in my book which very thinly veils a very interesting personality, and that's Mr. Raj Bansi. Whatever I decided that I want to defend, I defended it with fact. I defended it well. If I had to have a little argument with my editor as to why I want to keep a particular thing in there, I was not coming up with flighty, lofty ideas as to why I need it there. I felt that in order to keep the respect of my readers and the respect of my publishing house, every little thing that I put in, I had to defend, and I did. Yeah.
Thank you. I see Mitchell giving me signals from off stage here, so I think, yeah, there we go. I think we're out of time. So thank you, Zainab. Thank you, Kirsten, for your time and chatting to me. Yeah.
Thank you, Alan.
Thank you very much, Alan.
to everybody. Thanks.
Sawubona wenjabulo zusale kahle nhluphe